Hey everyone, it's Ryan with Spiceworks. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. Today we have another Spiceworks partner webinar, Protecting the Modern Data Center, the top strategies you need to know about, brought to you by Datalink, a Symantec Gold Platinum partner. A few things that you'll notice on the screen. The first of those is the question box on your screen. It's to the left. Please don't be shy. Submit questions. I know that our presenters would love to answer them. We're going to get to the questions at the end of the presentation. Another thing is right below the question box, you'll notice the resource list. That's just a great way to kind of learn more about what's going on. You can click on all those links. They're live. So hopefully that'll drive some of your questions. And then on the far right, you'll notice we have a few speaker bios. If you click on the arrow below them, you'll get to learn a little bit more about our presenters. And finally, you're going to get a link to this recording in about a week. So if you have to step out, it's no huge cause for concern. And now I will introduce our presenters. We have Larry Sachs, Principal Sales Engineer and Data Protection Specialist at Symantec. And we also have Mike Spindler, Practice Director, Data Protection and Storage for Datalink. Guys, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, everyone, for attending today. And we're going to talk about data protection, particularly in the virtual environment. And where we're going to start out is just give you a little idea of who Datalink is, and then we have a few poll questions for you to sort of judge the direction we take some of the presentation pieces. So moving to the next slide. Datalink is a publicly traded company. We're in the data center business, and we team with several large strategic partners like NetApp, HDS, Symantec, VMware, and Cisco. We're in about 30 cities across the country and made up of about 500 people within the country, about 100 salespeople now, and between our support center and our field engineers, we're very much an engineering-driven company with over 200 engineering personnel within the company. We've grown organically as well as through some acquisitions over the last few years, and we're positioned in the United States and very strong from that side of things. Our goals right now is to grow to $1 billion in the next 3 years. What do we do? As I mentioned, we work in the data center. And because we're an engineering-driven company, we really focus on the complete cycle within the data center, being able to provide not only the products that go with it, but the professional services, the actual support of the products themselves, being able to do assessments in environments, determine needs, match that to solutions using best-of-breed approaches and doing that, support that solution while it's in there. Datalink is one of the few vendors that from a virtualization side of things can be a single number to support your whole virtual data center. So not having to know is it a problem with my virtualization software, is it a problem with my storage, is it a problem with my server, one number to call to have that managed for you in doing that problem determination, managing those calls with those vendors. That gives you a short idea of what Datalink does. And let's move into a couple poll questions that we have for you just to sort of judge where our audience is at in their environments. First of all, let's start out to your environment that you protect out there. Over the last few years, we've had a strong move towards virtualization. What we'd really like to see is where in your company you are at in that virtualization strategy. So if you could pick the amount of your environment that is virtualized today, it would be helpful for us moving on. Give you a minute here. Okay, let's see where we're at. Pretty evenly spread across the board. From an industry standpoint, they say about 50 to 70% is averaged in today's environment, but we seem to have a broad cross-section all the way across the board. On the second question, again, aligning to data protection, how many different products do you use in your environment to back up both that physical and virtual environment? A single product, 2 products, more than 2 products. About half of the people have consolidated to a single product, and the other half have multiple products in their environment. And that's kind of the direction that we wanted to be able to take today, is to show you and contrast against some of the advantages and disadvantages in approaching particularly your virtualized environment and how you protect that environment. And many things have been changing over the course of the last few years when it comes to data protection. As mentioned, where just maybe 3 or 4 years ago you had no virtualization, a very small amount of virtualization, it was mostly backing up physical devices. That particular point in time, you were managing the physical devices, and maybe the virtual device is exactly the same way, loading clients in those virtual devices and just running those backups. Over the course of the last few years, too, many environments have moved from tape backup over to disk backup. In those environments, on the tape side of things, you looked at different things. How do I stream as many jobs as possible in order to keep a tape drive spinning? Or how many tape drives do I need in order to have enough bandwidth in order to accomplish my backup in that period of time? Or how my network works, how I can get the data from the clients across the network over to the servers that are managing the devices that are out there. The disk evolution has really come about to be able to simplify and give some faster response times in being able to not only back up a little bit faster, but in particular being able to recover incredibly faster in doing that. It also has brought us capabilities of being able to use different data protection scenarios and replicating data from one site to another. One of the things that disk backup has brought us is deduplication. Deduplication, if many of you are using it today, it gives us the capability of being very space efficient with that disk storage that I'm using, by being able to eliminate redundant data and deduplicate the data on a disk in order to maximize the amount of storage that you have on that storage. One thing that I've noticed in visiting many companies across the country is service level agreements have changed. Number one, they have become, from what data protection wise, they've become tighter, needing to provide data quicker, as well as much more granular, where a few years ago I just saw 1 or 2 different SLAs that environments have. Now you have much more granularity. Some compliance things have driven some of that. Business needs have been probably the biggest driver behind that. So complexity is there. Having multiple service level agreements depending on the type of client or the group that those clients belong in and how you're backing it up are also changing the landscape of that environment. And as always, in any data protection environment, that growth in data has also presented challenges along the way. Finding different ways to accomplish backing up more and more data is a constant in this environment. Unstructured data is probably the biggest growth of data within environments. That unstructured data coming from many different sources. How do I manage that data? How do I back it up? How do I protect it? Is it right to back up that data on a regular basis, or do I manage that? And finally, the virtual data center has really brought change to that environment. What I'm going to do next here is go through some of the decisions you should look at if, as you migrate down this virtualization of your data center, and how to provide that data protection forward. Give you sort of the decision points that are there and some of the choices to make, in that area. As mentioned, it's very, very different. On the left, I have my physical environment where I had servers connected to a network. I might have some storage on the network. I'm backing up through a backup server that's out there, and I'm going to disk or tape on the side there. On the right, I've taken all of those servers, I've virtualized that under infrastructure. Then I have shared storage, I have shared CPU, I have shared network, and many of those in the software-defined data center is software-defined, is software-based. So a very different environment requiring different approaches in order to provide that data protection. Some of the things that Gartner is seeing out there of what they see happening in the changing data protection landscape over the next couple of years. Right now, they're predominantly through 2015, they're seeing disk to tape being for the long-term archive as a predominant strategy within large organizations. There are several vendors that have talked about the death of tape that happened years ago, but it still seems to be there. It's really taking on a different role in that archive piece, as well as some of the disaster recovery that's out there. The technology on the disk side of things has moved ahead in order to provide better disaster recovery capabilities, and we'll talk about some of those specifics a little bit later. They're also estimating by the end of 2016, 40% of large enterprises, which is double the amount that they will eliminate tape. So they are seeing the capabilities coming there. The technology just needs to be very efficient to make it cost-effective in doing that being the disk technology. Also in that environment, we've had the poll question there, that how many different applications you're using. We're seeing a lot of change. We're seeing centralization. When virtualization started, many of the predominant backup applications didn't have very good integration to virtualization software, like VMware, for example. And it really wasn't the software itself. It was more of VMware didn't have the interfaces to it in order to provide that enterprise-level type of backup. And that has evolved over the last few years. What we're seeing out there is many people consolidating where they might have had multiple backup products in the physical environment and possibly another product over in the virtual environment. We see a lot of consolidation because having multiple products means multiple people support it, multiple means of getting things fixed when they break, and it just is an easier environment to manage from a single environment. So we see a lot of that changing. And then one of the really new emerging areas is the backup products talking much closer to the storage products themselves. Being able to have the backup product tell the storage product to make a snapshot, take that snapshot, back it up independent of the users accessing that data, and by the way, catalog that data within the backup application while you're backing it up in order to make it easy and give a single pane of glass for people to recover that data. We're just starting to see some production in that area, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. So for that virtual environment, decision number one, backing up agentless or having an agent. And what is meant by that in that backup environment, it can be extremely I/O intensive. Backup as a product itself is an I/O and CPU intensive process. If you put an agent in every VM that is a high CPU application, through virtualization, I'm sharing those CPUs, but it's all happening backups at the same time provide an impact in the environment. At the same time, it's a heavy I/O environment, so I have a lot of I/Os going to the storage that is out there. From an agentless perspective, working through the storage APIs in VMware for this example, but this would apply for other hypervisors such as Hyper-V and other environments that are out there. Provides somewhat of a proxy. That proxy is able to work within VMware to take a snapshot of those agents. Those agents don't have clients on them. This is managed through vSphere in this particular case. That snapshot is created, and then the backup application manages backing up that snapshot, cataloging that information, being able to back that information up one time, giving me a disaster recovery copy, and giving me the granularity of being able to restore individual files. Eliminating that CPU overhead in each of the guests, as well as the storage not impacting the applications as they're running, because that's being done from a snapshot of that information. So agent versus agentless is one of the first choices, and agentless is really the direction we're seeing most large enterprises move to just from the reduced workload. The only times we've seen agents in virtualized environments is if they're backing up databases or mail-type applications. And then the agent that's running in the guest is only there to really quiesce the application in case of a database, flush the transactions, commit them to disk before it makes a snapshot. So there's just a little application coordination. In VMware, that big piece that is doing that is the vSphere storage APIs. And there's multiple pieces within those APIs in order to do different types of operations. The piece that the backup applications are leveraging is the storage APIs. And what that allows me to do is perform a full backup, an incremental backup, or even a change block backup of the data stores that are out there. Have one pass at that, be able to have the VMDK of that I can recover that from a disaster recovery standpoint. Or if I deleted a file or had a user delete a file, being able to, through the API, look at that blob, look at that disaster recovery VMDK that's out there, and restore the file that was lost. Now, through these application APIs, they're able to do that. What you had with some of the virtualization software that was out there before these APIs basically did this through some reverse engineering of VMware and gives you the capability of mounting up some of those backups and then restoring individual files out of that and manage those environments. Some require agents still to run within the guest, so it varies across the board. Bottom line, going agentless is most helpful. Decision number 2 is, do you look at unified tools or do you use a purpose-built tool? Main things, some of these we've discussed, but capabilities I have with the unified or purpose-built tools, it's focused specifically on the project at hand. So it can have some capabilities that might be applicable to your environment. And most of the virtualization backup tools were really oriented towards the server folks who are out there, not the data protection folks that might be in 2 different areas within an enterprise. Over time, those needs have evolved, the volume of VMs that you have out there. I'm seeing many of the server people saying, I want the storage people to take over the backups because it's gotten too complex, from that side of things. On that unified approach, single applications, it gives me visibility to not just my virtual environment, but my physical environment. Say, for example, a physical host had a problem and went down. A unified product gives you the capability of being able to restore that physical host in my virtual environment to provide some DR capabilities. So not just DR, physical to physical, but physical to virtual or virtual to virtual. Gives me some capabilities across that. Also, your enterprise backup applications or unified products give you a broad range of support for many different disk, tape, storage type of products that some of the point applications really don't address well. So those are decision number 2 from that side of things. Key here is not really a decision, but just more of a suggestion. In a virtual environment, whether it's Hyper-V, whether it's OpenStack, whether it's VMware, you want to leverage deduplication. The capabilities that you have through these APIs give me the ability to multitask multiple processes. Being able to deduplicate that data as down to as little as possible, give me the space efficiencies, but also give me a lot of intelligence of being able to see what blocks change that are out there. Those capabilities give me a lot of additional functionality that we'll talk about in a few moments on the semantic net backup side of things to give you an idea of performing DR by just copying only change blocks across as opposed to complete backups. In other words, bettering my service level agreement of how soon I have data off-site because I'm moving as much, being able to decide how I back things up or when I deduplicate. Deduplicating at the source, right, at the client, deduplicating at the server itself, or at an appliance to do the deduplication. It gives you flexibility in order to match the application to the performance requirements that you need for your environment to meet those SLAs. Just have an example of some of those things that are out there. Here's two different examples of that. On the left, one of the first things you saw from the deduplication appliances were appliances that did the deduplication right within the appliance. So from a client perspective, you brought the data from the storage to the client, sent all of that data, incremental backup or full backup, across the network to the backup server. The backup server sent to the appliance, and it was deduplicated. Now, with the capabilities you have in this area, I'm able to have deduplication take place at the client, deduplication take place at the media server, and then everything downstream from that, I maximize that bandwidth. I'm able to perform things more efficiently. I can have multiple things deduplicating, use multiple CPUs to do those cycles, as well as being able to address remote environments from a client side of things. If I have a small remote client that's sitting out there, using client-based dedupe gives me the capability of being able to back up that client across the network and optimize that network, because I'm only sending the change data from the client across the network over to the server. So I can get by with smaller communication pipes on those remote devices that are out there that made it sometimes impractical of being able to run a full backup of a client that's out there, having to back up several 100 gig of data. It just, unless you had very large pipes, really didn't make sense. So deduplication improves those environments as well. In your virtualized environment, you really have three different things to sort of balance in that area. Based on what your recovery time objectives are, where you store that data can affect that recovery time. Coming from a disk, whether it's deduplicated or just raw written to the disk, the latter is going to give me the fastest recovery capabilities, a little bit slower on the deduplication because it needs to rehydrate that data. And then tape, assuming that it's in the library at the time, is going to be possibly the slowest piece that's out there, and it also depends on how you backed it up to tape that's there. From a recovery point objective, the other decision point that you have there is, based on the backup that I am using, how often do I want to perform that backup? And what is the impact to my environment in order to do that backup, in order to have that better granularity? If you traditionally ran backups just in the evening when users weren't there, the granularity you might need in order to hit a recovery point or recovery time objective might be doing backups during the day. If I do that during the day, I have to have means of having minimal impact to the environment while that backup is taking place. In other words, agentless, snapshots from the virtualization, backing up that copy of that data after that block level snapshot has been made, and also backing up just what has changed. Being able to represent a full backup through the technology within the backup software is key. And then finally, single pass versus dual pass. And we touch on this a little bit, particularly in the VMware environment. Through the APIs, I make a single pass at data that is out there. It might be the VMDK that is out there, and once I have that backed up, I have a DR copy. I can recover that VM from whatever my storage media is. Through the API, I make that single pass, just back up that VMDK, but if I need to recover a spreadsheet that a user accidentally deleted or a Word document that they needed, I don't need to perform a second backup in order to do file-level recovery. I'm getting the same granularity out of that single pass of backup, where some of the applications you need to run two backups in order to have both DR capability as well as the day-to-day file recovery. And then when you have to do that, that impacts the environment. From a future standpoint, as your virtualization environment grows, what you need to look at is scaling scaling of that environment. How do my solutions scale from not only a capacity standpoint, but a performance standpoint? Can my solutions out there be able to load balance across different storage media? Being able to spread the load of deduplication, spread the load of the replication across multiple computers, media servers, backup servers, whatever you want to call them, in that environment. Accelerator is something that Larry's going to talk to you about, but it's an exciting new feature that leverages some of these APIs in these environments to run a backup that is not a full backup. An accelerated backup is a backup of the physical blocks that have changed. Not an incremental backup, but just the blocks of those files in that incremental environment. And then being able to use that information to create full backups. So I can eliminate running full backups, which are the biggest impact you have on the weekends there. The duplication that you use should be optimized. The applications that you back up should be optimized to that deduplication storage. Different types of data deduplicate differently. And some types of data deduplicate very little. A lot of your unstructured data, image type data, audio data does not deduplicate well, so it might pay to send that to a different type of storage that is out there. Having that flexibility and optimizing your storage is really the fifth decision that you need to really look at in addressing data protection in that virtualized environment. Just wanted to give you an idea of an example of one of the deployments that we did and what that sort of looks like, where we have a large virtual data center. We're backing it up locally to some of the Symantec appliances in backing up their data, leveraging the vStorage APIs, leveraging that snapshot capability within VMware, and then we're replicating only the blocks that have been backed up, only the new blocks, over to an offsite site. As that site starts to fill up, we then move that data off to a tape library at the DR site in order to retain that long-term retention that I don't necessarily need the fast recovery off of the disk. So just as a summary and really what to look at, leverage the hypervisor APIs that you have out there. You need to look at your legacy applications as well as your virtual applications and pick solutions that mix well with both of them and being able to manage them accordingly, whether you have multiple applications or single applications that requires multiple people when I have multiple applications in order to support those applications. And as you've seen, deduplication seems to be happening everywhere, whether it's at the server, at the client, or at the target itself. Deduplication is going to leverage your environment for greater speed, better DR capabilities, and should be looked at and applied to the particular SLA of RTO and RPO that you have in those environments. From a tape perspective, tape is still fairly constant out there. The density is extremely high. Reliability factor on tape is very high, but it's really targeted today for long-term archive or maybe some of that unstructured data that I don't need to back up on a regular basis because once it's created, it doesn't change. So look at leveraging that where you can. Consolidate the applications, get down to a single application, can improve your environment, can improve the manageability of that environment. I'd like to now introduce Larry, and he's going to talk to you some specifics in the Symantec Net Backup area. Larry?
Hey, thank you, Mike. So one of the things that is challenging, and Mike addressed really the challenges, and I'm going to come back to you with how we address those challenges, is single pass backup, but being able to recover individual files can be very, very challenging. One of the most critical aspects is regardless of target, whether it's deduplicated target or tape target, we can still do individual file recovery without having to restage the backup image, and I can do that via single pass. It's patented technology within Net Backup, that's been there from the very beginning, and most of our customers find it to be very critical because in most cases they find they have to recover an individual file, and from a DR perspective they may be recovering an individual virtual machine, but on a day-to-day basis they find that they recover individual files. So being able to do that as part of that standard single-pass backup methodology without having to do multiple backups is very, very critical to our customers and has been embedded in the net backup solution for VMware since the very beginning. I like to call net backup for VMware as backup without compromise for recovery. So from an operational efficiency standpoint, the biggest challenges that our customers face is they're trying to deploy a extensible, flexible solution, but they find that when they have to go through the process of building their own architecture and building their own media servers, the process becomes very, very complex over time. So approximately 3 years ago, Symantec introduced the Net Backup appliance, and that appliance really addresses the challenges associated with the overall hardware acquisition, keeping software up to date, validate, test, deploy, and really providing the environment with predictable performance. And by leveraging a Symantec Net Backup appliance, our customers are able to address all of those challenges and reduce their overall maintenance support issues associated with their infrastructure by approximately 50 to 80%, providing the IT group the capability to focus on getting the job done and leveraging the key features of Net Backup that Mike mentioned were so important in a VMware backup architecture. So really, what makes the appliance so valuable in a virtualized environment? Number one, it's what we refer to as the time to production, installing it in minutes. The process of patching that appliance and patching the Net Backup environment, it's been done many, many times before because it's a known quantity. There's a lot of these deployed, which I'm going to show you in a moment as far as the growth in our appliance business. But more importantly, providing features and functionalities that if you built it yourself would be very difficult. So one of the things that Mike mentioned from a deduplication standpoint that's very critical is being able to leverage the data from a DR perspective. So we have built-in WAN optimization within the appliance. We also have layered on security associated with the appliance and hardened it. We offer within the appliance is included critical system protection, which allows you to provide or deploy templates. And in fact, even if I have admin type credentials on that box, I've hardened the application, and I've also hardened the components that are running on that application. We actually protect all those processes. And critical system protection is deployed in some of the most secure environments out there. The other thing that's really important to note is really our overall growth that we've seen over the last 3 years in the purpose-built appliance market. The overall name of purpose-built appliance didn't really exist until about 3 or 4 years ago. And there's a number of players in this market space, but the challenge that many of them have is there are multiple pieces that actually make up the overall solution. And with the Net Backup appliance, it's really backup in a box. And that ability to deploy and have a very reliable, robust, flexible solution has really shown itself in the market space. 3 years ago, we were in the other category, and now we're in the number 2 position. So what does this actually mean? It means that a lot of appliances have been shipped to date. As of fourth quarter of actually it would be our quarter, we actually are on a fiscal basis. So as of our fourth quarter, which would have been through March, we've actually deployed and shipped over 10,000 units, and we're still accelerating on a very healthy pace. This tends to be one of the fastest growing segments within Symantec, and in our customers, we find that they're able to leverage more of the advanced, complex features in Net Backup with ease because it's already integrated within the appliance. So from a virtualization standpoint, some of the things that Mike talked about is automated VMware protection. There's a functionality within VMware, and from a server perspective, that we refer to commonly as VMware sprawl. So what happens is a VM pops up, and how do I protect it? And I'll show you in a moment what some of those screens look like, but we're able to identify those virtual machines, put them into policies, and make sure that they are protected, and more importantly, being able to unify that across the environment. So Mike had mentioned, a purpose-built virtualization protection strategy versus a unified backup strategy. Net Backup for VMware has won more awards from the IDC than any of the other products out there, and the reason for that is it's more than just a unified backup. It is built for success in a virtualized environment. We actually leverage the functionality of the vStorage API so that we can do things like take the load off of the VMware infrastructure while we're backing up clients. We also do support feature functionality such as VMware Accelerator as well. But more importantly, we're able to report across all of the backup architecture to provide a unified recovery. And I'll talk about really some of those key features, because a backup really isn't very valuable unless I can actually recover the data and meet the service level agreements. So one of the key features that the VMware administrators have been looking for from their infrastructure is visibility into what's happening. They want to be able to make sure that their VMware environment's being protected, and they want to actually be able to do a restore from a disaster recovery scenario as well. So we provide visibility into the virtual machine protection, and what you're actually viewing on the screen here is actually our VMware plugin, which is a virtual appliance that runs in the infrastructure that reports on the status of the machines being protected. It'll also tell you what machines are not protected as well. So this gives them, the VMware administrators, the visibility that they require to be successful in their VMware infrastructure. Not to mention it's a great summary screen as well, so that a network administrator could actually look at the VMware environment. So the other component that was introduced in Net Backup was the feature functionality support for Accelerator. So VMware has a functionality called VMware Accelerator. It has change block tracking. We're able to leverage that change block tracking to actually do an incremental backup of that virtual machine, synthesize it with the full virtual machine, and support recovery of the complete virtual machine or individual files of that virtual machine. And what this really means from an overall performance standpoint is I only have to look at a very small file to actually synthesize the full backup of that virtual machine. And it gives me extensive flexibility within the architecture, and the only thing I need to do in Net Backup is hit a checkbox and turn it on. So what actually is taking place within that architecture is when I look at that change block track, I only have to also dedupe that small component that is changed, so it also reduces my overall load on my backup. So what does that give me? Not only does it give me support for my VMware servers, but it also gives me capability with my application plugins. So I can actually back up and leverage that change block tracking for items such as SharePoint, Exchange, and SQL, and get the value proposition of that change block tracking for very fast backups. And that faster I can back up a virtual machine, the less space I need to have on my data stores, the less impact I have on my underlying storage for my architecture, and more importantly, the less time it actually takes me to actually validate, in fact, I've backed up my environment with less resources. So I know this is a little bit of an eye chart, but what this example is actually showing is what that backup looks like leveraging change block tracking. So the loader part of the screen, the initial backup took 5 hours and 56 minutes and 36 seconds, protecting 105 gig of data. We later backed up the same machine. Actually, nothing had changed on the machine, but even if it hadn't changed without us leveraging Accelerator, we'd still have to snapshot the machine and look at it. But because of that, the only time that is leveraged is the time that it takes to actually look at the CBT file itself and create a virtual snapshot of it. So you can see that the backup of that server before took 5 hours and 56 minutes, almost 6 hours versus 2 minutes and 36 seconds. Big performance savings on the overall backup time and the amount of resources required to protect the environment without sacrificing or compromising my recovery. So the other functionality in net backup that we're finding to be very critical for many of our customers is they may have physical hosts that they want to back up and later convert those to virtual machines, or they may have a physical host that they want to back up in Site A, replicate that backup image to Site B, and from a DR perspective, recover it in a virtual infrastructure or even test patching. So we have a physical to virtual recovery for bare metal restore, and it's merely a checkbox within the backup policy itself. And when I do the recovery, I have the option of actually recovering it to a virtual infrastructure. So how does this whole process work? So the very first step, and what I'm going to talk about really is leveraging SAN transport. We do support other methodologies as well. We support network-based transport. We support hot add technology. But the lowest impact level that Mike had mentioned was being able to leverage the SAN infrastructure and doing a snapshot on the SAN itself. So what happens is net backup communicates with the virtual center server. It instructs the virtual center server to go ahead and create a snapshot frozen in time and redirecting the writes to another source. And once that snapshot is created, the backup is actually copied, or that virtual machine is actually backed up directly off the data store, which puts no impact on the other virtual machines running on that ESX host. It also puts no impact on the ESX environment as well. And more importantly, I can back up at my IOP speed of my storage, underlying storage, so I can back up very, very quickly. I'm also going to map out, as during this process, not as a post-process, but inline, map out the data stored on that virtual machine. And the reason that's important is not only does it give me individual file restore, but it also allows me to skip files that have been deleted on that virtual machine as well. So why take up space and why try and dedupe deleted files off of the virtual machine? Because we do have that visibility into it with V-Ray. The last step after the backup's completed, we go ahead and release the snapshot, and VMware then merges the redirected writes back into the original snapshot, into the original virtual machine. So, of course, the biggest challenge that we talked about was that concept of VMware sprawl. How do I select my virtual machines? What happens if somebody adds a virtual machine to my infrastructure? And more importantly, how do I identify them from the standpoint of my architecture so I make sure that I'm getting the best performance out of my overall design? So we have a automated virtual machine backup selection, and you merely select the field associated with that virtual machine, and these are fields pulled directly out of Virtual Center. You put in an operator, whether it's an equal or an and or an or, a not. You can specify the values. You can actually hit the folder, and it will actually give you the values that are contained in your vCenter infrastructure, and you build a query. And more importantly, after you've built the query, you can actually test that query to, in fact, validate that it is a valid query and you've included all of your machines. So the other part of it is really being able to, from a wizard standpoint, define how I'm actually backing up if I wanted to manually specify the data store. So in that case, I actually have the ability to drill down into my data stores and my clusters and make the selection criteria that way as well. So as you can well imagine, your VMware architecture is really designed for workload, not necessarily backup. So what backup has a very powerful process can actually overrun the infrastructure. So we actually have resource limits built into net backup as well. So I can specify, for example, how many virtual machines I'm going to back up per data store, or how many virtual machines I'm going to back up per ESX host. So I have the ability to really set granular resource limits. So in fact, if I'm backing up 200 machines across 50 ESX hosts, I can actually specify backing up 4 at a time, and rather than just going through them sequentially and having really dead resources and really having hotspots within my architecture, I can balance the load across my entire infrastructure as well and get much better throughput performance, and more importantly, not have a requirement for excess resources within my storage architecture, so I'm not doing things such as wasting space with snapshots. So the other piece that I put in here as it related to backup without compromise for recovery is one of the challenges our customers have, as Mike had mentioned, is shorter and shorter service level agreements for recovery. So NetBackup has VMware Instant Recovery, which allows me to instantly power on a machine and recover it and start using it actually before it's even recovered. The overall process doesn't need any change. So when I do my backup, I don't have to do any special switches. And really, once that machine's powered on, I have full access to that virtual machine. I can run that application on that virtual machine. I can, more importantly, run storage vMotion while that virtual machine is up and running and put it back onto my production data stores and start doing my operational recovery of that machine and leverage that machine while it's being restored. So how does that work? What we actually do within the backup recovery information we have is we actually present the backup infrastructure as an NFS data store. It actually, when I do my restore, it actually appears there as another data store, and I'm able to, at that point, do a storage vMotion of that virtual machine back over to my physical infrastructure, and it allows me to immediately start using my environment while I'm still in the process of a recovery. And all I really need to do is power on that virtual machine. And of course, the other part of it is the minimal disruption as part of a disaster recovery. It gives our customers the capability of doing an extensive DR without having to have extensive resources on the other side for their disaster recovery. So the other component here is if I've got, for example, an operating system that I maybe didn't tell it to do single pass backup on because for whatever reason it was a very large virtual machine, I didn't expect to do single pass backup, didn't want to waste the time mapping, I can actually leverage the instant recovery to go ahead and present the NFS, show the virtual machine, power it on, copy the files out of the virtual machine, don't do any process of a vMotion, and just power off the virtual machine. And during that process, I was able to recover off individual files without having to bring back the entire virtual machine. Just another capability within the functionality of NetBackup. So, Ryan, I know that I kind of went fast. I was trying to make up for a little bit of time and wanted to kind of open it up for questions in the last 10 minutes at the top of the hour.
Definitely. I will jump in here. And let's get right to the questions. I know we have a few that came in, and of course we encourage our users and our attendees to keep submitting those questions. The more the merrier. So here's the first one we have. If I'm using servers today and I add appliances to handle additional workload, how does that change how I manage the environment?
Brian, this is Larry. I was going to answer that. What it actually does is it frees up the associated resources required to manage those servers, and more importantly, from a design architecture standpoint, you're provided with predictable performance, so it makes it much easier to size the architecture and leverage some of the advanced features, such as the instant recovery. There's no additional configuration required when leveraging appliances, and they're also able to leverage some of the other enhanced features that we didn't talk about in this presentation, known as SAN transport to a media server as well, which historically most customers didn't use before they were on appliances just due to the level of requirements associated with defining and managing that architecture. So as I refer to it, providing flexibility and extensibility without inheriting the complexity associated with doing those advanced features and functions.
Thanks, Larry. And we have another one here. My unstructured data is getting out of control. How do I get my arms around it from a data protection perspective?
This is Mike. There's various strategies in looking at that unstructured data. And as I mentioned, some of it can deduplicate, some of it can't. But by definition, unstructured data itself, once it's created, it generally doesn't change. So backing up that data in a normal backup regimen doesn't make a lot of sense because it's not changing. You're backing up the same stuff over and over if you're doing the full backups that are out there. A few different approaches. Use the accelerator type of backup that only backs up change blocks. It'll run very, very quickly because the only thing it's going to back up is really new items that appear out in those areas. I still have the space considerations that are sitting there. Other key things would be to archive as opposed to back up that unstructured data. So it's out of a backup regimen. You have copies of it. You can recover it. You're still using the same database within your backup application, but you're not backing up that massive amount of unstructured data that changes on a daily basis. So in summary, there's not one clear answer to that. There's several different approaches in being able to deal with unstructured data there, and that's a very hot topic within our large customer base that's out there today.
Thanks a bunch, Mike. And then we're just going to leave it open for another few moments here for some more questions to roll in, because I know we still have a lot of attendees on the line. All right, and then I'm just going to ask you guys to close it down. Do you have any final words that you'd like to part us with, or any other common questions you see?
Probably the biggest challenge that I see with customers is really the parasitic value associated with putting agents inside of VMs. In most environments, or I should say all environments, the reason customers virtualized in the first place was to get the greatest density possible. And when they planned the density, they planned the workload for day-to-day operational workload. They didn't plan that density for virtualization as it relates to backup. And it's really important to understand leveraging backup and snapshotting using the advanced API, as Mike had mentioned as well, to protect that virtual infrastructure, because two things that don't virtualize, or virtualization has challenges associated with it. One is the network stack. I'm actually splitting the network stack, and the other one is the storage as well. So anything I can do to take the load off of the storage and take the load, and when I say storage, I mean the actual VMDK itself, take the load off the storage and take the load off that virtualized network stack is going to pay back many dividends over from a backup and recovery. And of course, the other component is actually being able to recover that data quickly, whether it be instant recovery or actually restoring that virtual machine back across the SAN fabric back to its original host so that it can actually be leveraged and simplified from the standpoint of recovery.
All right, well, thanks. I think that's going to do it for us, guys. And thanks, Larry and Mike, so much. You're a fun group to work with. And that was a great presentation. And thanks to all our attendees for hanging out with us and spending some of their day with us. Just a reminder, you're going to get a link to this recording in about a week, so be on the lookout for that. And that's going to do it for us. I hope that everybody has a great afternoon.